Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, celebrity divorces. Hello, I am Tamika Lee Cheney, litigation partner with Cordell Cordell, based out of our Dallas office. I've been licensed to practice family law for 19 years, and I am board certified in family law. Welcome back to another Men's Divorce Podcast Live. This month, a panel of Cordell Cordell divorce attorneys will answer your questions live and to discuss the divorce of actor Ben Affleck and actress Jennifer Lopez. Cordell Cordell is one of the largest domestic litigation firms of its kind in the country, advocating for you before, during, and after divorce. With 30 years of experience in all facets of family law, we are a partner men can count on. Please make sure to submit your questions in the chat sections on YouTube and Facebook Live. Men's Divorce Podcast Live is a special monthly series hosted by Men's Divorce Podcast and sponsored by Cordell Cordell. If you would like to listen to more topics regarding divorce or family law, subscribe to the Cordell Cordell YouTube channel. As a disclaimer, an attorney client relationship is not established through this webinar. We encourage you to contact our office directly for any legal advice. So today we will be joined with two of Cordell Cordell's litigation partners. First is Tiffany Yates McWhorter, based out of our Fort Worth office. Tiffany, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tamika. I've been practicing for 18 years now. I am also board certified in family law, and I practice in our Fort Worth office. From Fort Worth, we handle matters all over this area in many counties, and I'm happy to be here and answer any questions and discuss this topic to try to assist everyone who's having to face the concerning matter of divorce right now.
Awesome. Next is Jonathan Wynn, based out of our Utah office. Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I've been practicing now for 17 years. I've been with Cordell Cordell for coming up on 15 years now, and been exclusively practicing family law. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I am thrilled you two are here and look forward to discussing these intricate details about the divorce of Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck compared to those of everyday folks. But first, we will take a short commercial break. All right, now before we begin, I would like to at least share some background information about Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck as it relates to their history and their current situation. So some of the information that we received is from reliable sources, but specifically, Lopez and Affleck first met in early 2002 on the set of their movie Gigli, while Lopez was still married to her second husband, Chris Judd. Now, after Judd and Lopez split, Lopez and Affleck went public with their relationship. In 2002, prior to Lopez and Judd getting divorced, Lopez confirms her engagement to Affleck. Now, in July of 2022, Ben and Jennifer were married and they go on their honeymoon. And then in 2022, they moved back in together, and all of their kids from different relationships moved in together as well. Now, in May of 2024, there are reports that the two were living separately. And in August of 2024, Lopez files for a divorce, citing, as of April 26, 2024, the date of separation. So some of the things that I want to talk about today with Jonathan and with Tiffany are, how does these celebrity divorces compare and contrast with everyday divorces with others? And just to start, obviously, I just want to say, as far as these divorces are concerned, a lot of them are the same. The only difference that I would say exists is the fact that these celebrity divorces are put on display so that everyone knows what's going on. However, they deal with the same or similar issues as everyday folks, where we're talking about child-related issues, we're talking about property and debt division, and we're talking about spousal support. So we're going to engage in detail about certain questions and things that's happened as it relates to Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck's divorce, and how it relates to the divorces that we've handled in our states and jurisdiction. So first, I want to just pass it over to Jonathan. Jonathan, you want to talk about some specific topics as it relates to the divorce?
First off, the chatter on social media and within the media is just how are they taking this divorce? One of the things that's come up is alcohol, being overly consumed. And the important thing to remember is divorce is hard. It's hard for anybody out there. Celebrities are not immune to just the heartache of a divorce. Even when you try to do it amicably, it's hard. And so the first thing that I'd love to talk about is just kind of how do you handle the trauma that comes with the divorce?
Great question, Jonathan. So I just want to talk about that specifically as it relates to the trauma. So Tiffany, let me ask you, in your cases where you have parties that are dealing with emotional aspects of a divorce, what do you typically advise your clients, if any, as it relates to how to handle those situations?
The first thing that I tell clients is give yourself some grace. All of us in stressful situations sometimes act in ways that we're not proud of. Maybe we are too hard on ourselves. We question ourselves about decisions we've made in the past that we can't change. And I start with give yourself some grace and then get a counselor that you can trust. It's very common and very tempting to start talking about all of our divorce issues with family members, maybe with our other friends, maybe common friends that we have. And I absolutely tell clients that you need someone that can give you some objective feedback, but it's understandable that this is one of the hardest things people deal with. I mean, it's said that going through divorce is harder than dealing with the death of a spouse, because in a divorce, there's still this open-ended connection that you're trying to navigate as opposed to if a spouse passes away. So get yourself some counseling. Let yourself feel these emotions. Let yourself start to adjust and to get used to a new normal that you don't discuss with your children ever, that you don't discuss in the presence of the children with other people. But your friends and family will often tell you what they think you need to hear, or they'll share bad advice that they're really not qualified to give. And that often leads people into making decisions that only make the divorce process harder, because they take actions that have been told to them by other people. So the first thing I say is get in with a counselor, someone that you can kind of unload all this information that is not going to judge you, but give you some objective feedback and tools that you can use to navigate this divorce while it's pending.
That's perfect. So Jonathan, let me ask you, have you had any situations where you had potential clients that were dealing with these emotional aspects of a divorce, maybe someone that didn't want a divorce? Are there situations in which there are grounds where a person can't get a divorce if for some reason one spouse doesn't want that divorce? Or is there laws out there in your state or jurisdiction that allows parties to ask the court to force the parties to go to marital counseling? So talk to us about that particular situation.
Yeah, historically in the United States, and even really kind of going back to Europe and even all the way back to the Judeo-Christiana thing, there was kind of this idea that you could only get divorced if there was fault shown. You had to actually prove a fault. Now, almost every state, as far as I know, every state now has what we call irreconcilable differences, which is a no fault. It basically just means if somebody wants a divorce, they can ask for it. And at that point, if you're the other side, there's really nothing you can do to stop the divorce. It's going to happen, legally. There's nothing you can do to stop it.
So that's perfect. So that goes into grounds for divorce in terms of there being an irreconcilable difference, meaning no fault divorce. So in Texas, just so that we address the specific grounds for divorce in Texas, we do have the irreconcilable difference, as Jonathan specified, but we also have fault grounds for divorce as well. And those fault grounds are in relation to certain things like adultery or cruel treatment. And just to go back to what's going on with Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, just based on the information that's been provided, it said that Jennifer and Ben went public with their relationship before Jennifer ended her marriage from Chris Judd. And so I want to ask Jonathan, in your situation, are there fault grounds in Utah as it relates to adultery or cruel treatment or something of that magnitude that would allow someone to be able to plead those things? And what would you advise a particular client in those situations who did what Jennifer and Ben did and displayed their relationship before ending the existing relationship?
Maybe the better question is there a reason to plead fault? So most states, in a normal divorce, you've got three separate categories of divorce. You're dividing property, you're dividing income, you're dividing children. The question is does fault affect the results of the divorce? In most cases, all it really does is almost like it's used to kind of throw mud at the other party. The judges typically aren't going to change the division later on in a divorce, whether it's irreconcilable differences or adultery, unless there's very specific laws in that state that require or plead that. In Utah, for example, whether you plead domestic violence or adultery, it could have effects on the alimony portion, the division of income, but the other aspects it doesn't. And so you really want to be careful the reasons why you feel like you should say something, especially in a legal document. If you're pleading fault, it usually is somewhat inflammatory.
Fair enough. So let me just say, as it relates to Texas, when we're talking about the fault grounds, especially when we're talking about adultery, so there is this waste claim that tends to be brought up in divorce cases in Texas when someone has engaged in a relationship with someone else before ending their existing relationship. I tend to tell clients, you're married in Texas, you're married until you're divorced. There's no such thing as illegal separation in Texas. And so what happens is, when you've moved on in a relationship while you're still married, you're now potentially using community monies that belong to you and your spouse on someone who is not a spouse of the relationship. And so that monies can then be requested back through the court system when you're talking about dividing those assets and monies that's been spent. So I always tend to advise clients to tread lightly, be cautious in that aspect in terms of displaying your relationship. Not necessarily saying you can't move on, but just be cautious in terms of how you procedurally do those things. So let me turn it over to Tiffany. Tiffany, talk to me about some of the things that you've witnessed or that you've reviewed in the reports about Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck's divorce, in terms of some things and how it works with the everyday divorce cases that you've handled.
Well, I think this goes also to relate to what you talked about on the adultery aspect, because what we see with the celebrities is something that we often see in our own lives, which is posting on social media or the things we see in the tabloids. Both of these parties are unfortunately getting to experience everybody in their business right now with regard to every time they step out their front door, there's photos. Every time that they're seen in public, there are going to be photos and articles and speculation about what they're doing. The same applies on a much smaller scale to our everyday lives when you think about social media. So some of what they're dealing with in this divorce, as Jonathan mentioned, there are rumors about alcohol use, rumors about probably other relationships, rumors about one party not handling this well. Those come from the same type of instances that we might experience in our own lives. Because when people start posting things on social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever it may be, there are often repercussions from that, because something that may be an innocent event then begins to blow up. So it may be that there is no adultery involved in a case, but all of a sudden some innocent social media post takes off, and then the other party starts to speculate, and maybe they're spinning their wheels and wasting resources trying to chase down something that should not be an issue in a case. So we try to warn clients that just as we are watching from the sidelines on these celebrity divorces in our own lives, we need to be very careful about what we're posting on social media, but also what we're allowing others to post on social media. It may be through no fault of our own that a friend that we have has tagged us in a photo or mentioned us in a location check-in or something of that nature that we have no control over, but later gets misinterpreted. So I think the best advice while you are going through this process is to change your settings. If you're on social media, don't post things about your location or what you're doing. It's often better to change any of your settings you have so that No one can post things about you without your knowledge or without you agreeing to that. And always talk to your attorney. Find out some tips from your attorney of what you can do to help these irrelevant issues from popping up throughout your divorce because someone saw something on social media that maybe isn't accurate.
You know, that goes to the famous phrase is you have the right to remain silent, and anything you say or do can and will be used against you in a court of law. You know, although that's a criminal saying, boy, it applies to family law, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. And I was going to ask you, Jonathan, on that same topic that Tiffany was talking about, on the flip side of that, if you were representing the party who wasn't posting and the other side was posting, what do you tend to advise your client as it relates to getting that information and building on that particular information that they've received?
You know, we're always looking to gather information to build a case, and social media is a landfill of just all kinds of refuge you can grab. One of the things we'll typically do is we'll subpoena like Facebook and get everything they've ever posted ever. You know, every picture, every comment, even the private chats we can subpoena and look at. So even if you think, oh, this is a private conversation I'm having on the Instagram or something, a subpoena can get that. And the other attorney could be looking it over and combing through to see if there's something that's helpful for the case.
Perfect. Absolutely. And that includes Facebook, that includes TikTok, that includes there's so many. I can't even name all of them. And so I agree, be very cautious in terms of what's being posted out there on social media. So let's jump into the next topic specifically. So Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, they both reported that they were living separately in May of 2024. And so I want to talk with Tiffany as it relates to parties living separately during a pending divorce case. Is that advisable? Is there something that you would consider talking with the client about in terms of how to handle those particular situations? Do you want to shed some light as it relates to that?
Absolutely. So what we tell clients and what I always advise is talk to your attorney before you make a decision to move out. If you have a case where there is not a domestic violence issue, now obviously if you're in fear of violence, in fear of any harm coming to you or your children, that is a completely different fact scenario. You must keep yourself safe. That's the number one priority in a divorce, and you must keep your children safe. However, in most cases, if there's not a domestic violence issue, we encourage clients to stay in the house, stay in the residence that you're sharing with your spouse until you get some advice from your attorney. Because what many people don't realize is if they get frustrated and they feel like there's just too much tension here, I need to get out of the situation, and they move out, there are a lot of things that they appear to be waiving or relinquishing once they move out. For example, if the house is in the school district where your children go to school and you elect to move out and get another residence, and it's not in the school district, you have, in a sense, created a primary residence within that school district where your spouse is living with the children. Also, if the children are still living in the home, it can be presented to the court that you left the children with the other spouse because that's where they live and you've gone somewhere else. Also, if you're living separately, you need to think about that you're creating two sets of bills. Instead of one utility bill, you have two. Instead of, one payment for homeowners insurance or renters, now you have two. You have two house payments or rental payments. So it's really important not to do anything from a knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, we get angry and we say, we're done, we want to leave, we're not gonna be in this situation. We strongly advise our clients, talk to your attorney first. In most cases, if the parties can get along throughout the process, it protects them financially, but it also protects from things once you try to come back to the house to remove items, maybe they're no longer there. Once you, if you decide that you want to keep the house, well, if you haven't been living in it for 2 years, you have no idea what kind of maintenance is being done at the house or what kind of condition the house will be in once you return. So it's always good before you decide to separate, talk to an attorney first. Let us help you decide every pro and con that you're going to face once you actually make that decision. So, and I always tell my clients, if you move out, if we go to court on a temporary basis to try to determine where everyone's going to live, a court's not likely to move you back in. So it's better to talk to your attorney first before you create these two households if it can be avoided.
Perfect. Now, Johnny, let me ask you, because I don't know if you recall or not, but Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, they had been married for about 2 years now. And they both have a lot of earnings and assets, like we're talking about in the millions, right? By each of them. And they've continued to accrue revenue from businesses and more. They have children from prior relationships, but there is no prenuptial agreement that was signed by either one of them. So, can you talk about the prenuptial agreements in terms of the benefits of entering into a prenuptial agreement in these situations?
You bet. You know, what we call prenup or premarital agreement, antinuptial agreement, we're talking about a contract that's made between two people before they get married about what would happen if they get divorced later on. Now, you know, as a father, if I'm thinking about my own children getting married, would I tell my children, hey, you should get a prenuptial? Well, the answer there is it depends on when they get married. If my kid gets married in the 20s where they have nothing, it's probably not necessary. And it's kind of a weird concept of negotiating a divorce in the honeymoon phase of a marriage. Like it's a weird concept. And I get why a lot of people hesitate to go there. But the one piece of advice I would give everyone out there is if it's a second marriage, and if you've accumulated wealth prior to marriage, I'm not talking college kids getting married. I'm talking you've accumulated some wealth, you've accumulated assets. It is so helpful. It will save you so much time, so much trauma, so much heartache later on if you can contract for a prenuptial agreement beforehand.
That's perfect. So let me ask you. So in terms of this prenuptial agreement, a lot of times we're talking about entering into a legal and binding contract before the parties enter into a divorce case, right? In this situation with Ben and Jennifer, although they didn't enter into a prenuptial agreement, Jennifer, my understanding, she sought to resolve this divorce amicably. So she filed her own recognizance, number one. And number two is my understanding that both parties are attempting to mediate their divorce case amongst themselves. So I want to ask you, Tiffany, about this mediation or the alternative dispute resolution to resolving these divorces amongst mediators or some third party versus the parties going to head in front of a judge. How would you advise or instruct a client in that regard?
Well, I always try to encourage clients to keep in mind that when we go before a judge, oftentimes that's the first time that the judge has looked at your case. The judge doesn't know you. The judge doesn't know your spouse. The judge doesn't know what kind of property you have or if there's sentimental value or any of that. The judge is getting, oftentimes, if we're talking about property or children, they're getting 3 hours, maybe a full day of trial to get to know the parties and try to make rulings based on what limited information they have. In my opinion, and I believe that most family lawyers would tell you the same, the best approach is to try to reach an agreement with your spouse through the use of a mediator. And what we do here at Cordell, and in the states that I practice, when we do mediation, your attorney is with you and you're able to sit down and really hash out things that are important to both you and your spouse that may not be things that the law would normally grant to either one of you. For example, if you have certain family traditions where there are certain holidays that are important to one party and they're not to the other, well, the court's not going to take the time to figure that out. The court is typically going to give you what is a standard customary possession schedule. With regard to property, if there's certain property that it makes sense for one of you to retain that property because you can better afford it and it would cost too much to divide it, well, the court's just going to divide it. That's what the court is supposed to do. Being able to go to mediation and actually talk about, through your attorney, through the mediator, the things that are important to you that a court's not going to take time to hear and not going to have an opportunity to consider is generally the best route, because once you go to mediation, you can help craft what maybe you're not 100% satisfied and they're not 100% satisfied, but you've had a hand in crafting an agreement where you're still on reasonable terms. Once you go to trial, everybody is going to bring out the ammunition of the things that worst things they can say about one another, and you're both going to leave frustrated and after you've basically gone to battle. So we always encourage clients to, through guidance of counsel, let's attempt to move things to mediation, because oftentimes we can come up with a solution that at the end of the day, the parties are still at least having some sort of amicable dialogue and relationship with the matters they need to continue to discuss, like their children in the future. Versus when you go to an all-out trial, there's a lot of hard feelings there. And often there's a lot left to be desired with the ruling you get from the court, because the court hasn't had the opportunity to know all the facts about you and your spouse's history together.
That's good. So, there is Cordell and Cordell have offices all over, right? Different states. And so there are different laws that applies depending on what state and what jurisdiction you're in. And I think it's imperative that people at least seek out legal advice from family lawyers who, number one, they focus solely on family law, which means they know what they're doing. And number two, they are qualified, meaning they know what they're doing in their particular state. And so, for instance, Texas is a community property state, which means in Texas, the courts are dividing the assets that the parties have acquired during the marriage in a just and right division. However, every state is not a community property state. And so as Jonathan is licensed in Utah, Jonathan, what sort of state is Utah in terms of how the court divides the assets and debts there?
Yeah, so here we don't use the term community property. We have marital and separate property, and so having legal counsel is so intense and so important. You're not going to get that from YouTube. It's just not going to happen. I had a client say to me once, I'm not sure I can, a potential client say, I'm not sure I can afford legal representation. And my response is the same to everyone. You can't afford not to have legal representation. If your funds are that tight, you can't afford to do it wrong. Ben Affleck, Jennifer Lopez, they have enough money that if they screw this up, they're probably going to be fine. Even if they lose half of their net worth, they're probably going to be fine. It probably won't even affect their lives at all. But for the rest of us average people, we can't afford not to do this the right way.
Absolutely. I agree with 100%, Jonathan. Thanks to you and Tiffany for joining us and providing this valuable information today. Thanks to all of you who are watching and live streaming with us. Obviously, if you want to retain our services, or if you have specific questions related to your particular situation in your state or jurisdiction, you should visit CordellCordell.com or call us at 1-866-DADS Law, LAW, so you can get in contact with a Cordell and Cordell attorney near you. And remember, we offer consultations. Those consultations can be specific as it relates to in person. It can be by telephone, or it can be virtual at your convenience. But you want to make sure that you're consulting with an attorney who, number one, again, focuses in family law and know the laws in their state. And be on the lookout for our next podcast airing during the month of October. Thanks to all of you. Have a great day. Today's episode is being presented and produced by Lexicon, a legal technology company.